theme of the circus is a common one in Roman art. From lamps to glassware, from sarcophagi to terracotta plaques, to my focus today, mosaics. And this popularity led to the emergence of a number of standard schemata for representing aspects of the circus. These essentially fall into two broad groups. Those which depict the competitors in what I refer to as a static pose, and you'll see what I mean in a minute, and those which depict a race in progress. There are many examples of the static pose type. For example, this famous mosaic from Rome showing charioteers not in their chariots, but they're clearly charioteers by the whips that they're carrying, and they come from each of the four teams, the greens, the blues, the reds and the whites, and they have a representative horse beside them. And then we have over 25 examples of the victorious charioteer type, which survive, the kind of thing we've just been debating just a few minutes ago. And this shows the driver in his chariot holding up a victor's palm branch, usually. And these are two examples that originally came from Rome. They're now in Madrid. And there are a number of instances of these mosaics where we're actually given names, not just of the charioteers, but sometimes also the horses. Here, two examples. Eros from Duga, with two of his horses named, and Polydus from Trier, with his horse Compressor. Now, such details introduce the idea of celebrity for the charioteer and the horses, and of elevated status for the horse owners and sponsors. The provision of the names of both the charioteers and the horses also indicates some specialist knowledge on the part of the spectators, and that a patron could demonstrate his support for individual charioteers or factions through this kind of art. The connoisseurship visible here can be paralleled in other areas of Roman sport and spectacle, which some of you may be familiar with. For example, the gladiatorial graffiti from Pompeii, which record individual wins and losses, and of course is very much a feature of modern approaches to sport. You just have to think about the sometimes endless commentary that you get, an analysis before and after any kind of sporting event. These depictions of victorious charioteers are important to our interpretation of the second major group of circus mosaics, which is the focus of this paper. And these are the mosaics that apparently show a race in progress. In fact, there are 10 examples of this kind of mosaic now known, 8 which were published by John Humphrey in his magisterial work on Roman circuses, published in 1986. And these are the ones from the Western Mediterranean. From Spain, Girona, Italica, which is very poorly known, and Barcelona. From Tunisia, Carthage and Gafsa, which is the latest one, and Silin, which is in Libya, and then Piazza Armerina, which is probably the most famous, on Sicily, and Lyon in France. To that, we should add 2 relatively new ones. They're relatively new discoveries that come from the Eastern Mediterranean. One at the villa of Herodes Atticus in the Peloponnese, which I was unable to find an image of. And this one from northern Greece, it was found in a house in the Roman colony of Philippi. These mosaics range in date from the 2nd to the 6th century AD, and a number of them are in fact dated, not usually on very good archaeological evidence, to sometime in the 4th century, partly because this is when you get the increased political prominence of the circus. It's rather poor and shaky evidence. The circus mosaics are by no means identical, but they do all display a similar and established vocabulary in terms of motifs and spatial schemes. They provide panoramic depictions with multiple events that create complex visual narratives, and they take a bird's eye view, at least in terms of the depiction of the race. Further, whilst there is an element of stylisation to the iconography, the presentation of the building and the racers provides insights into the concerns and attitudes of both organisers and spectators, as well as the skills required of charioteers, the dangers posed for participants, and the rewards of competition. Whether it's the Circus Maximus or a more generic circus building that is being shown is not something I'm going to address. It's actually a subject for a much larger paper, and so obviously not. I'll definitely be guillotined, I think, if I start to talk about that. What is interesting to note, however, is that the majority of the well-preserved examples, the ones that you see here on the screen, survive from the two areas identified by Pliny the Elder as particularly renowned for horse breeding, Spain and North Africa. And I'm going to be drawing my examples from these ones that you see on the screen. A singular feature of these circus mosaics, which sets them apart from other mosaics depicting Roman spectacle, for example, gladiatorial combat, is that they are defined by an architectural space that is appropriate to the activity. And this is usually indicated by the provision of the central barrier, which you can see here on the Barcelona mosaic. However, the mosaic from Carthage shows an impressively complete depiction of the venue, with the race completely enclosed in an architectural setting. This comprises the whole structure of a circus, admittedly more of an oval, with starting gates, seats, interestingly without spectators, and a central barrier. And there, in fact, seems to be an attempt to show awnings, the velaria. Now, this is something that we're much more familiar with from this famous wall painting from Pompeii, showing the Pompeii amphitheatre. But when you look closely, perhaps if I go back, because this is bigger, when you look closely at the Carthage mosaic, there does seem to be, at least in a very stylistic way, an attempt to show something similar. So, leaving aside the overall architectural setting, the main structural elements that concern us are the starting gates and the central barrier, with the turning posts at either end, the metai. The permanent features of the barrier have a commanding role in the mosaics, and obviously the barrier itself is vital for the race, as the chariots raced anti-clockwise around it for traditionally 7 full circuits. And of course, these are counted off using lap counters, which are also another important part of the iconography. Here we've got both the golden eggs and the bronze dolphins. The starting gates, the carceres, which are also a very important part of the circus, are shown on some of the mosaics, not all. But they clearly had important symbolism. They're usually shown in multiples of 4, 8 or 12 being the most common, and 12, of course, was the usual number in at least the larger surviving circuses, such as the Circus Maximus and the circuses at Merida in Spain and Leptis Magna in Libya. In the mosaics, they're often shown flattened out in contrast to the bird's eye view of the other parts of the venue. The start of the race provided a point of high drama and tension, akin to the start of the final of the 100 metres, or indeed to the beginning of the Grand National or any other modern horse race. And the excavation of the starting gates in the circus at Leptis Magna, which you see here in the top right, along with these artistic representations, have allowed a much greater understanding of the opening mechanism of the gates themselves. And indeed, the technology is effectively the same as that developed in the later 4th century BC for the start of athletics races in the Greek world. And it is clear from this that it was really important to ensure that each chariot had a fair start. As we will see what happens after that, fair does not describe it. Structural evidence from surviving circuses shows that the starting gates were usually placed on an angled curve to ensure that each chariot began at the same distance from the near turning post, effectively a stagger. And this is only reflected, in fact, on one mosaic, the Piazza Armerina, down there in the left-hand corner. If we look at the Lyon mosaic, which is early 3rd century in date, it actually shows 8 starting gates. And there is a white line close to the near turning post, which may be a representation of some kind of break line. Now, as we've already noted, all the mosaics depict a race in progress, with the chariots racing anti-clockwise. If it's correct that at least at the bigger meetings, the races on the whole lasted for just over 7 laps, the length of the race was approximately 3 miles, so that's just over 5 kilometres, and it would have lasted just over 8 minutes. And the race in the film Ben-Hur conforms to that. So watch the race in Ben-Hur for, in fact, a very good reconstruction with a few Hollywood liberties taken, as you would expect. As we've already seen, the lap counters are often shown in the mosaics, the 7 eggs, the 7 bronze dolphins. The chariots themselves are quadrigi, 4-horse chariots. Races involving bigi, the 2-horse chariots, and indeed much larger teams, such as 6 or 10, which are known from documentary sources, are rarely part of the artistic iconography of the circus. The number of charioteers shown might vary for artistic reasons, but there's usually at least one wearing the colour of each of the 4 factions. So there's usually one green, white, green, red. On the Céline and Lyon mosaics, there are 2 of each, but there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. However, the mosaics do not depict one particular race, or even one moment in a race, but present a composite view with successive actions unfolding within that one space. They show key race moments, displaying an in-depth familiarity on the part of both the mosaicist and the viewer. So let's look at these key moments. The first one is the start. It's best shown here on the Céline mosaic, as the chariots sprint for that white line, not shown on this mosaic, at the first turning post. They want the inside line. This is a major demonstration of driving skills and the speed and courage of the horses, as well as the daring of the driver. From this point on, they are sprinting on the straight to try to get ahead. This is where speed is vital, to make sure that they stay ahead of their opponents. And the speed is conveyed in the mosaics not only by the more relaxed pose of the charioteer as he wields his whip, but also by the overlapping legs of the horses, which are both similar and varied. The chariots hug the barrier, and in some of the mosaics, as here, they are actually shown as they approach the far turning post, slightly angled, as they prepare to make the turn. They need to keep that inside track, as this is the most desirable for victory. So therefore they need to slow down to take that turn and to make it safely, and then speed up again as they come out. Very reminiscent of the very rapid change of gear that a Formula One racing driver, for example, might have to make as he goes through a bend or a chicane. Now the turn is the most dramatic part of the race. And on the mosaics, this is reflected by the fact that usually at one or both of the turning posts, there is a crash, a naufragium. This is what the Romans called it, a shipwreck, which actually does rather nicely describe the way it's depicted on the mosaics. The turning posts were actually the points of greatest danger. This is where everything could go horribly wrong. And this is where the greatest skill was required. And therefore, success would win the greatest applause and acclamation from the crowd. The final key moment is the victory. The winning charioteer with the victor's, shown with the victor's palm branch, either crossing the finishing line, as we have on the Lyon and Cillin mosaics, or being presented with the palm branch, as on the Piazza Armerina mosaic, or doing some kind of victory lap, as might be the case on the Cillin mosaic. So you can see you've got a number of things all going on at the same time. Now, as well as the charioteers, there are a number of other figures involved in the proceedings, both on foot and on horseback. The number varies from one mosaic to another, partly depending on the state of the survival of the mosaic. But there are always at least 2, and in some cases as many as 7 figures apart from the charioteers. Cassiodorus, writing, as I said, in the early 6th century under Theodoric, refers to these circus attendants by the term Circensian ministry, and they carry out a variety of jobs. Those on horseback, highlighted there, are the hortatores, whose job it was to act as a kind of scout for the charioteer, seeking out the best course and providing encouragement. They can only have got in the way, but that's for another discussion. Those figures on foot are depicted in a variety of poses and dress, and they are often shown holding a number of different objects. Particularly interesting is the individual who is usually identified as the sparsor, rather awkwardly translated into English as the sprinkler. It's to do with water, and all of the objects they hold would have contained water. The containers vary, goatskins, bowls, but the most common is the amphora, and you've got several examples here on this slide. They are all, no matter what the container, are identified as these sparsores, but we don't really know what their job was. Did they throw water at the horses to cool them down? Did they provide water at the beginning and end for both horses and charioteers? Or did they throw the water onto the ground to keep the dust down? They belonged to the factions, so they would only have been doing this job for particular charioteers. Yet another element of chaos and presumably danger as well for the charioteers as they have to negotiate their way round hortatores, other charioteers in their chariots, as well as these individuals on foot. Now, the sprinkling of water on the ground is actually something that is mentioned in some late Roman texts with an apotropaic purpose. That is, sprinkling the water on the ground to ward off evil powers and to bring good luck. And of course, circus curse tablets are a not uncommon find, emphasising the ends to which fans and participants alike might resort to ensure victory. I'm not going to read this out, but basically, really awful things are wished upon both charioteers and horses in these curses. And I think you will agree that it's definitely not in the modern Olympic spirit, or at least not the advertised one anyway. Now, those figures holding the amphorae, and you see one here on the Girona mosaic, seem to be dressed more like charioteers. And some are actually shown with whips, not this particular one, which has led to the suggestion that these are not just attendants, but are actually charioteers' teammates, possibly taking part in a race, in a type of race referred to in literary sources and in epigraphic evidence as pedibus ad quadrigiam, on foot beside the chariot. And it's thought that this was a type of race that involved a chariot with its driver and a runner who ran along beside, all of whom had to cross the finishing line in order to win. And it's something like the apobates, I'm assuming, that we've got reference to in Athens. But it's yet another enormously skilled, possibly slightly mad type of event to be involved in. Several other figures are shown with coloured ribbons or streamers, particularly clear here on the Barcelona mosaic up there in the right-hand corner. And they're common on other mosaics as well. Now, these figures with the streamers or ribbons seem to be shown at the turning posts, and it's been suggested that they were a kind of referee to make sure that there was no cheating, a la film Ben-Hur, at the turning posts, at that crucial point in the race. But when you actually see where they are in these mosaics, I think there might also be an artistic reason for the placing of them by the turning posts. Of course, they could be a Roman version of a cheerleader as well. That's another possibility. On the Cylin mosaic, some of these figures, extra figures, present further interpretive challenges. Two male figures here who may have been sparsores, to judge from what's been dropped on the ground, seem to now be in some kind of fight. And then we have another figure who is emerging into the arena who has a shield and a sword. And it's been suggested he is a gladiator, although gladiators in the circus is actually quite unusual. But these might be interval entertainment. We know that entertainment was provided between the races. These races took a lot of setting up. And these took place from the time of the Republic, and indeed was the context for the introduction of animal displays and athletics displays to the city of Rome. And we have a number of surviving circus programs. This is the most complete that I'm aware of. It's a late one, as you can see, 6th century AD. It comes from Egypt, so it's a much smaller race program. But notice that there is something going on between each race. And we've got a troupe of athletes, we have mimes, we have a hunt, and rather intriguingly, singing rope dancers as well. One final issue to consider is that of the naming of not only the charioteers on some of the mosaics, but also the horses. On the Girona mosaic, the charioteers and the lead horse of the chariot is named, and on the Barcelona mosaic, all 4 horses in each team are named. Equally on some, for example, Piazza Armerina, Barcelona, and a victorious charioteer mosaic there up in the top left-hand corner from Merida, there is the inclusion of some kind of stud or stable brand, and that's what I've put the red box around. This detailed knowledge and interest in the horses, their origins and therefore their lineage, is clearly important, and of course can be paralleled today in the seemingly endless detailed information on sires and dams that are rehearsed before a horse race. Familiarity and concern with this kind of detail, the form of the horses, can be further demonstrated on this tombstone from Rome of Lucius Avius Dionysius, who was a trainer for the Red faction. And he's shown with 2 clearly particularly successful horses that he, one assumes, trained, whose form is given in some detail. Indeed, we get more information about the horses on this man's tombstone than about the man himself. Pliny the Younger was very clear, as he was on many things, on how boring the races were. And he says, "The races are on, a spectacle which has not the slightest attraction for me. It lacks novelty and variety. If you've seen it once, there is nothing left for you to see. So it amazes me that thousands and thousands of grown men should act like children, wanting to look at horses running and men standing on chariots over and over again." I have to say, it reminds me of Euro 2012, but anyway. Which brings me to my final point, the spectators. They aren't shown on all of the mosaics, there's often not room. They are shown in the greatest detail on the Piazza Armerina mosaic in one particular location, and they are all enjoying fast food. You can see the loaves on or something on trays. The Cylin instance offers one specific reason why the spectators might not be shown. The starting gates are actually at the left-hand end of the floor where the doorway into the room was located. Thus, visitors would mimic the charioteers entering the starting gates. The race mosaic is flanked by larger areas of geometric mosaic, as you can see from that. This is from the excavation report, and it wasn't a particularly clear photograph in that. And this is where the dining couches would have been placed, because this was a triclinium. So the diners are the spectators. And it's further emphasised by a rather unique feature. Well, not just rather, it is a unique feature in the corpus of Circus Mosaics. These are the two views that you would get. In all of the others, as the chariot rounds the turning post, it is still shown the same way up. These are upside down, depending on which side you are on. So, as we've seen, these mosaics essentially accommodate several viewpoints and shifts in emphasis, which means that the viewing experience is one where simultaneous happenings compete for spectators' attention, just as in a real race. They may represent a specific race, perhaps sponsored by the patron in whose house these mosaics were laid, or they may be more generic in nature, and they capture the chaotic excitement, commemorate the driving skills of the charioteers, and the courage and speed of the horses. So, are you ready to experience this for yourselves? This is where I need the drumming of horses' hooves, so you have to imagine that. Sidonius Apollinaris, in his poem addressed to Consentius, provides a poetic description of a race held in the circus at Ravenna in AD 465, in which we learn a great deal about the tactics of chariot racing. Some of this I'm going to put up on the screen, and I have severely excerpted it. Brightly gleam the colours, white and blue, green and red. There behind the barriers chafe those beasts, pressing against the fastenings, while a vapoury blast comes forth between the wooden bars. And even before the race, the arena they have not yet entered is filled with their panting breath. The horses push, they bustle, they drag, they struggle, they rage, they jump. At last, the herald, with loud blare of trumpet, calls forth the impatient teams and launches the fleet chariots into the field. The ground gives way under the wheels, and the air is besmirched with dust that rises in their track. Now, as if flying out of sight on wings, you had traversed the more open part. The hoarse roar from applauding partisans stirs the heart, and the contestants, both horses and men, are warmed by the race and chilled by fear. Thus they go once round, then a second time. Now the return of the sixth, and the crowd are already clamouring for the award of the prize. Then an adversary, it's amazing what you can find on the internet. Then an adversary, exulting in the public plaudits, ran too far to the right, close to the spectators, and another, fondly thinking that the first man had already gone ahead, shamelessly made for your wheel with a sidelong dash. His horses were brought down, a multitude of intruding legs entered the wheels, and the 12 spokes were crowded until a crackle came from those crammed spaces, and the revolving rim shattered the entangled feet. Then he, a fifth victim, flung from his chariot, which fell upon him, caused a mountain of manifold havoc, and blood disfigured his prostrate brow. Then arose a riot of renewed shouting. The just emperor ordered ribbons to be added to the victor's palm, and crowns to the necklets of gold, and true merit to have its reward. And whilst the tangible rewards of victory might be the palm branch and victor's crown, the real rewards were prestige, fame, glory, and wealth. Thank you very much.